The pop journalist Malcolm Gladwell has famously argued that all the thousands of hours that the Beatles spent in Hamburg, immersed in endless sets played well into the night, was the kind of practice that makes perfection. But he seems to have overlooked the case of Pete Best, the drummer in the band for so much of the Hamburg period. Bitterly, at times, Paul and George would complain that Pete simply couldn't keep proper time. His beat was always slightly off, they insisted. For much of their early period together, John, Paul, and George couldn't find a satisfactory drummer. Then Pete was recruited after the others came to know him because of the Casbah, a music club and coffee house in the basement of an old house owned by Pete's mother. The Beatles played there, and Pete seemed a reasonably decent drummer to accept until a better one came along. The problem was that all that time they shared together on a personal level made it difficult to jettison Pete when a truly great drummer named Ringo Starr finally did come along. Every day they spent living together in Hamburg made it harder to face the inevitable fact that Pete remained a mediocre drummer without the steady beat the band needed to excel. If all that weren't bad enough, Pete was so quiet and shy that the others never felt that he shared the spirit or the energy they all brought to their music. Like Stuart Sutcliffe, he looked cool on stage, and the female fans liked him. But the Beatles felt that he was holding them back, a less than kindred soul who had the misfortune to have almost nothing in common with the others in the band. An early promotional ad for the group in Liverpool summed up the popular perception of their talents and moods. Appearing at the Hive of Jive Club, the members of the group were described as John Lennon, the singing rage, Paul McCartney, the rockin' riot, George Harrison, the chic of Araby, and Pete Best, the bashful beat. That beat was so bashful that George began encouraging John and Paul to join him in stomping out the true beat of the music as they played in order to compensate for Pete's failings. Malcolm Gladwell and many others have missed a really important story about the Beatles' apprenticeship in Hamburg. It wasn't just all the hours of pounding out music as they performed song after song to rowdy audiences that was behind the development of their special level of brilliance. No, what set them apart was having to pound out all that music against the grain of a bad beat. This forced them to overcompensate, not only with stomps, but also the clapping of hands and anything else they could muster to play essentially as three guitars and three voices, pretending they were a cohesive group when their drummer was not part of that. Paul, in particular, learned to play his four-string bass guitar almost like a six-string lead guitar so that he could enhance the beat. Having a bad drummer made all three of the other band members much better musicians. It's just that simple. Better yet, they adjusted their playing instinctively so that it became second nature to play a certain way. For that reason, when Ringo did replace Pete, the other Beatles went on playing as they always had, except that now there was the surprising magical addition of a real beat coming from a drummer who knew what he was doing and rarely needed coaching. They played like Pete was still there, but now everything sounded right, and the band noticed. Unaware of the special obstacle overcome, the world just assumed that the Beatles had always played that well. John never gave Ringo higher praise than when he said, at the end of the Beatles' career, "If I get a thing going musically, Ringo knows where to go, just like that. We played together so long that it fits."